All right, so welcome to our first video on evolution. Evolution is not a new topic to us. It's a word you've heard in and out of science classes probably for years and years, and it's something that really forms the bedrock of our understanding of biology and life. It's a term we've used a lot already this year. We talked about how being able to evolve is one of our 8 characteristics of life. It's one of the things we look for to say, yes, you're alive, and ties all living things together. We also looked at in cladograms how we're looking at evolutionary relationships. What we're going to do in this unit is really talk about what is evolution and what is not, and then also talk about some of the patterns we see in nature as far as how it affects populations and different species. So the 2 big questions we have, number 1 really ties in a lot with classification. So how can evolution explain the diversity of species on Earth and the connections between all life? So when we see in our cladograms those branches coming off and we see sort of new species evolving, what drove that? What drove that branching? What drove that separation in those populations? And number 2, why is variation a necessary component of evolution? There we go. All right, so this is our unit overview. These are all of the questions we'll be able to answer at the end of this unit. So number 1, what is evolution? What factors can cause a population to evolve? Those are the ones that we'll tackle in our first video. Our second video will take on the tenets of natural selection. Tenets might be a new word for you. Tenets are foundational principles upon which bigger ideas are built. So when we look at the tenets of natural selection, we'll be looking at what are the big ideas that hold up this giant theory that is evolution by natural selection. We'll then look at the evidence. Since we're a science class, we love ideas, but in order for them to become part of our scientific investigation, we need evidence to support them. And so we're going to look at what is that evidence that supports the evolution by natural selection. Next, 5 and 6 are kind of new things for you guys. We'll look at patterns in evolution. So when species change, what are the patterns that we see in nature for how they're changing? And then last but not least, we'll look at within a population. So when a species is undergoing evolution, what do we notice about shifts, patterns of changes in their phenotypes or how they look? So the first thing we're going to talk about, and this is something that we know, we've heard this before, but we want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. So what is evolution? If we take this one word on its own, all evolution is its change in a population over time. It is nothing else. So I have the tree of life over here. So what we're seeing is all the way down in the very bottom, your origin of life. As we see these branches, these changes, as life gets more complex, goes from unicellular to multicellular, we get cells diversifying to do special jobs. That's evolution. That's these populations changing over time to give us this diversity we see. So an important distinction to make here, because this is one of the common mistakes that people make when they talk about evolution, is that individuals do not evolve, but groups of individuals or populations do. So for example, I as an individual and you as an individual will never evolve. And the reason for that has to do with the fact that there's a strong genetic component to evolution. Your genes, when you are an organism, so once that first cell that is you forms, your genes are set. They're not going to change within your lifetime. So because of that, individuals cannot evolve. What we're going to do now is talk about mechanisms of evolution. So these are how can we explain that change in a population over time? So we're looking at what drives that change. So when we see branching, why? Why was there that split? Why are new species forming? And there's really 3 big reasons we have that are known mechanisms with evidence to support them that explain why we see branches. So the 3 we're going to talk about, the first one is something called sexual selection. The next one is artificial selection. And the third one I think is very familiar to all of us. This is your idea of natural selection. It's important to realize that although we'll spend a lot of our time talking about natural selection is really not the only way to explain changes in populations. So if we look at our cladogram over here, we look at, obviously these are our hominids. So we see our orangutans, our gorillas, our humans, chimps, bonobos. So what they're showing you on the cladogram is they're showing you that speciation, that branching. So natural selection is the mechanism that explains why we see these separations, these branching, but we can also explain these separations using sexual and artificial selection as well. So the first type is sexual selection. Sexual selection is actually a specific type of natural selection where it's the mating preference of one of the sexes, so either the males or the females of a population, that are driving change in that population over time. What this essentially means is it means that if we pick a trait and that trait is chosen by the opposite sex so that they will only breed with individuals that have that trait, then over time that trait becomes more common. Now we can look at really solid examples of this in nature. The first one, if you look at my picture up top, I have an image of a male elephant seal. Male elephant seals are massive. They are incredibly huge. Now, why is this? Well, the way that elephant seals reproduce is that a male will hold a territory on the beach. The larger the male, the bigger the territory that he is able to hold. Females, when they enter the beach, they will choose a territory, and females choose territories with large males that hold large territories. Now, you might think of yourself, okay, so how is this an example of selection? Well, if it's the biggest males, the largest ones that are the ones that are passing on their genes for being really big to the next generation, then what's going to happen to the size of male elephant seals over time is they're going to get bigger. So there's our change over time. There's our evolution. Over time, male elephant seals get larger. The advantage for the females here, even though they are sharing the same mate, is that any sons they have will also get that male's big elephant seal male genes. So their sons have a better chance of reproducing once they grow up. So you may think, what's in it for the females? Why would they all want to mate with the same male elephant seal? But that's their advantage. The other most common example you find if you look up sexual selection is the peacock. So underneath our bottom image, we are all very familiar with this one. That is the male peacock's tail. Male peacocks are very, very pretty. They have this beautiful tail. When it fans out, it looks like a bunch of eyes staring back at you. And this is actually an example of predator deterrence, but also an example of sexual selection. So females, when they go to choose which male peacock they'll mate with, the male peacocks will present to the female, so they'll fan their tail out, look really pretty, and females will choose the male that has the best looking tail. Now, again, why they're doing this? Any sons they have from that male peacock will get that male peacock's pretty tail genes, so their sons will have a better chance of reproducing. So again, sexual selection, females are choosing based on a trait. The interesting thing with sexual selection is that you don't necessarily have a survival advantage. So males with these really big, massive tails actually are a little easier to catch because they are dragging around big, massive tails. It also costs them a lot of energy that they're allocating to the upkeep of these beautiful tails. The next type of selection we have is artificial selection. This is when humans breed organisms with desirable traits to increase their frequency in the population. So for example, if we take our top one, we have our cows. Humans breed cows for milk and for meat, but we're looking at dairy cows up top right there. So when humans go to breed cows, they pick cows with the biggest udders. So over time, the size of the udders of cows have gotten bigger and bigger. Now, this is actually a disadvantage to the cows. These cows need to be milked multiple times a day, or else they'll develop a condition known as mastitis, or infections of the udders. So it's a disadvantage of them if they were to be wild animals. But they're selected for, these giant udders are selected for by humans because we want the milk from them. And the bigger the udder, the more milk production per cow you get. If we look underneath, we can also look at modern corn. So if you look, the most ancient form we have is called teosinte. If you look at it, it's got very, very small grains on it, and the male and female were very similar looking. Over time, humans have selectively bred the female. So if you follow along kind of the bottom right here, through selective breeding, we were able to make the female reproductive part of the corn a massive, totally massive. And this is when you eat corn, this is what you're actually eating. And so this is all due to your artificial selection, so humans choosing those traits. So I used the term earlier, but I just want to flesh it out. So artificial selection is also called selective breeding. So here we have our examples with dogs. So dogs, all dogs, had a gray wolf as a common ancestor, but humans over time in different parts of the world started selectively breeding dogs with different traits. So for example, if you wanted a large hunting dog, then you might select for something like a hound. If you wanted a guard dog, you might select for something like a mastiff. The last one we have, the downside to your